Now they take the video game out for a test drive. Do the characters move the way they're intended? Do they go where they're supposed to? Or do they run into trees and walk through walls? This is the development team's last chance to rid the game of any bugs. After that, the company can finally market this video game and hope it becomes a hit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Furidashi podcast. I am Nicholas. We are here with Lauryn, and we are also here with returning champion, two-time star forward, Masao Kobayashi. How you doing, Masao?
Hello. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back.
Yeah, thank you for coming back.
No, it was a lot of fun last time, so I'm glad to be back and actually talk about making video games instead of just like, I don't know. We talked a lot about, I think, kind of tangential subjects or...
So yeah, no, we finally wanted to actually have it since, well, specifically you. What I think is really interesting about having you on is that you worked so long in the AAA space and then decided to do the sort of like smaller indie / like Friends studio.
Yes.
So that's a term I'm inventing now, the Friends studio.
I think it's definitely a thing. Yeah. Like we've all known each other. I mean, the person I've known the least amount of time I've known for 3 or 4 years. Yeah. But everybody else, like I've known for over 10 years. So.
And so the other reason why I thought it was important to have you on even again, not just because you just sort of nudged us on Twitter, but also because so I tend to sort of constantly put forward this argument that a lot of what you see in terms of video game design and video game production is largely determined by sort of like the scale of how it's being produced. So like lone devs tend to produce certain types of things, like small teams tend to produce certain types of things. AAA games tend to be certain types of things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a feeling like you are the ideal person to push back against that. And I feel like that's an argument that needs to be made. So like for you, how do you see like your previous situation being different in terms of sort of like the creative output from what you're doing now? And also just talk a little bit about, what Cut to Bits is working on.
So I can't really talk too much about what we're working on specifically because we're unannounced, but
yeah, I was going to say, don't say anything that you can't say. Say obviously. Things that you can say. Welcome to games. That's the first rule of video games.
Violate every NDA you've ever signed, please.
Yeah. So I think there is some truth to like smaller teams making different types of games than larger teams for sure. I mean, there's the practical, you're not going to make an open world MMO with 4 people.
True. Yeah.
It's just not physically possible. And then there's also the fact that so the bigger the game, like the more, I mean, not always, because there are smaller teams that are more calculated in terms of what segment they're going to and kind of look at it more like a, trying to find a niche for their product rather than trying to, make something that means something to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously it's especially more in the mobile market. You do see smaller teams that are just trying to kind of figure out how to make a buck.
Yeah.
Not that that's a bad thing. I consider myself a business person, and the primary responsibility of a studio is to maintain itself. You do have to continue to pay people. So, but yeah, that being said, obviously, I think a solo dev is going to be, I think, most poignant in terms of I think it's a question of trying to get consensus.
Yeah.
one person doesn't have to argue with anybody to put anything in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
5 people, it's going to be much easier to like kind of come to an agreement in terms of what they want to do. And then like 500 people, like, well, it's at that point, it's not.
So do you feel that like the creative process is kind of directly influenced by that team size? So for example, you had talked about reaching consensus, which is super important when we work in games, like making sure everyone's on the same page. But is a solo developer able to be more poignant because they're consensus with themselves? Or can like a larger studio, like let's say 50, right? Can 50 people not be poignant? Like, can they not create something that is very challenging and different?
I think you can be poignant, but I like when you see examples of things that solo devs have done, like I think Time Spinners is a really good example of this. I'm not sure if they're like straight up solo dev, but I think majority of the game was done by pretty much one person. And it's a Metroidvania that's like time travel-y. So that's kind of like the wrapper of the game. But like when you dig into the narrative, like there's a lot of stuff about like queer relationships and pan relationships.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't have made it into like a AAA version of whatever that would look like, because like it has almost nothing to do with like the product wrapper, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because like, and I think that was something that was personally important to them, and they put it into that game. But like, you're not going to see that level of like, okay, like pretty much everything that is flavor text is going to be like dedicated to like something specific in a like a AAA
like a
environment,
AAA title.
because you're just not going to see that. Like upper management's going to be like, why are we doing this? And like, and like,
but if
even
it was part of your studio culture, right?
I guess,
be like inserting personal memories or things that are very personal to you inside of the game, and the studio culture was that, and you'd have the studio execs, I guess maybe there would be a few that would be like, well, why are we doing this? But do you think that it is possible, I guess, to kind of change from within the system?
You cut out for a second, but I think it is possible. I think it's just less likely, like I think there's a difference between, and there's a difference between like diversity of opinion and like perspective. And I think even bigger studios are kind of, getting the message that they need to have like more diverse characters and diverse stories in their games. But like, I think the difference here is that like it's a very singular perspective that is like that takes quite a bit of like real estate within the game. And I'm it's not a good or bad thing, it's just like that's just a specific, and the reason I bring it up is because like people talk about it in that game. Like it's just I think that kind of game, and that kind of like, this is important to me, so I'm going to talk about it in this game that may or may not have like direct relations to like what I'm talking about. Like, because it's one thing when you have like a like a visual novel that's like a pan queer visual novel.
I have no idea what you're talking about. One of my favorite games is not.
Like it makes So that kind of game, like the systems and the genre and like the content line up with each other.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I bring up like Time Spinners, because like
I've actually never played Time Spinners, so like that's why I'm I was always curious. I'm always about pushing,
it's good actually. It's I enjoyed it. It's a very solid Metroidvania, but it's curious. I mean, I don't really want to sound condescending. I think it's great, like, that somebody had like a perspective and they really wanted to like, push it. And I think that's kind of the beauty of like a solo dev. Like you could just be like, well, this is what I want to do, I'm just going to do it. And I think like that kind of thing gets like, you get less of that the larger the team is, because like in many ways you have to justify like, how is this making the game better? And I guess like if you're a solo dev, you don't have to. You can just be like, I just want to do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think that's really the important point, is that there's sort of less justification that has to take place. And sort of like as things scale, like the degree of justification also scales along with it, such that when you're talking about, say, like, a massive like AAA studio or mainstream studio, you're not only having to like justify things to like others on your team, but you're also having to like justify things between teams, because it also means that you're going to be like creating work for, say, like art
Yeah.
or corporate combat, so that there are always these problems that you run into, because it's like you don't not just it's not just about consensus, but like you need consensus precisely because you're going to have to get someone else on board with doing that work as well and be as invested in it as you are. Whereas if you're like, a Toby Fox, you can just do whatever, even if it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense.
Mhm.
Like you can stick whatever in, you don't, and sort of the lack of justification is then. So now here's an interesting thing. Thinking about the distinction, not necessarily between, say, like quote unquote indie and AAA studios, but thinking about the difference between, say, like small teams and lone devs. Because in the case of lone devs, the production process and the intention, like, it's a perfect match. Like there is no distinction to be made. But it is
Yeah.
at the point where you start to have to work with a team at all, like that's where it starts to diverge. And so I was wondering about your thoughts in like I guess you could say like within indie territory, rather than sort of like, between these sort of like monolithic massive game companies and sort of like anywhere between sort of like, 5 and 50 people in a studio.
So I'm a producer in the indie, and in the indie space, especially for a smaller studio. Like right now, we have 6 full-time developers on our game, including myself. So like that's pretty unusual in terms of like a dedicated producer for a team that size.
Yeah.
And as such, I'm very aware of what I do. And what's interesting that even in our size studio, and partly because of like COVID, we're a fully remote studio right now. Initially, we were not. Most of us do not come from a remote background. Well, actually, none of us come from a remote background. We're all used to like working in a giant studio in person. And there, like, even within the size of our studio, like we still kind of have like divergence in terms of priority or like ideas. Because the thing is, like, when you have a team, you have to like say like, this is what I want to do. And let's say like our team is pretty unique in a sense that like we have almost no divergence in terms of like the like game vision. Our creative director basically came up with the concept of the game and said like, this is what I want to do, and everyone just said, okay, let's do it. And there has never really been any real pushbacks in the vision. Obviously implementation, we have kind of back and forth because like you can only do what you can do.
Yeah.
So but like, so even within the context of like everybody wants to like, everybody's running towards this like one vision, one like idea for a game. We still have kind of like differentiating like we kind of still have to kind of bring everybody back and kind of regroup.
Yeah. So
Like
before we get too far into the weeds of it, I actually do want to take a little bit step back onto the balcony here. And for any of our new listeners that are just coming into the podcast on this episode, or maybe our listeners that are just realizing what video game development is today, could you actually explain a little bit of your role as
okay,
well? And then
sure,
actually get into like that day to day, because I know kind of what you're talking about, and Nicholas kind of knows what you're
Yeah.
alluding to. But let's just plainly state it for
okay.
any viewers out there.
So I'm a producer, and there's various kind of types of jobs that in my family of jobs, and the broader context is kind of project management. My job is to basically, so in terms of how do video games get made, like basically video games start as a pitch, right? Like well, I mean, this can take different forms, but typically like initially you have an idea, like I want to make a, like, I don't know, a fighting game about monkeys, and it's going to be a cartoon style. And then, so that's the idea, right? And then you put a team, bring a team together. Person, let's say the person coming up with the idea was a designer, so he's a game designer. And then that person is going to find an artist and a programmer and various members of the team to kind of bring together to do work on different parts of the game. So you need a programmer that's going to like code all the systems. You need an artist and animator and VFX artist, or however many artists that you need to, you know, put visuals to the systems that the game designer and the programmers make together. So the designer says like, will say things like, oh, okay, well, I want to have like a big, strong monkey that's slow, and then like a skinny monkey that's really fast. So, and then the programmer says like, okay, well, I can make these features and I can make these variables that allow us to have like a strong big monkey and like a fast skinny monkey. And then like the artist would like, you know, model the monkeys, and then so my job is to make sure that everybody is talking to each other. We have a plan, and that everything is prioritized, and we have a timeline. Basically, in terms of like the crucial things that project management people do is first identify all the features that need to be done. So, okay, like in order to ship this game, I sit everybody down and say like, we need to have these 15 features. These 15 features are absolutely necessary for the game. These 5 features are cool, but like we don't necessarily have to have them. And then there's 5 features that would be like, if we ever have the time, that's nice, but like we're probably never going to get to that. And so, and then we say like, oh, of this 15 features, we're going to do in the order of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
And you would say that's probably the same between, right, your AAA and like the indie experience.
Yeah, I mean it's just a question of scale. Like video games are generally made in similar fashion. I mean, there are games that are not made like that, but those are more the exception rather than the rule. Like most games start with an idea. That idea gets communicated to everyone, gets broken down into tasks, and then delivered incrementally. So that's my job, is to kind of facilitate that process, you know, and kind of introduce processes. So like, how do you get like, so let's say somebody has like a PowerPoint document or a Word document or whatever, and they're like, this is the game I want to make. Taking that and then making that into like, okay, so, you know, let's say the programmer is named Sarah. Like, Sarah, I need you to do A, B, and C. Like, getting that, like going from the Word document to giving task for Sarah, the ABC task for Sarah, that's my job, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's important because like a lot of people, when they think of like game design or game development, they tend to focus on things like art, or they tend to think on like people who design combat mechanics or level design or things like that. Whereas in many ways, it's unfortunate that what you do is often like invisible in the design process, but also crucial. And so it's sort of weird. Like it's both fundamental, and at the same time, if it works well, no one really realizes that you did it.
Yeah. And it's also very nebulous.
Yeah.
Because like, so there are, and especially on smaller teams, there are projects that don't have a distinct producer.
Yeah.
And that can work in smaller teams because somebody is essentially doing that job pretty well. Like, and it really kind of depends on the preference and the temperament of the designer. I think more than anything, because like I think the person that like naturally, it's generally a programmer or a designer that kind of blends well to being a producer as well. And it's because like, so like so there's some there's different kinds of processes for making video games. One of the predominant ways is agile, and one of the things that they talk about is user stories. So they say things like, okay, I want this to happen. So like in that case, that would have been like the big monkey that's strong. So that's a user story. And being able to take that user story and break it down into like effective assignable tasks that are scoped, and scoping is to say how big that task is. Like this is going to take 6 days, or this is going to take 6 weeks, or whatever. So yeah, like I'm sorry, this is super crunchy. Am I losing? I don't know.
No.
I was
This is
No, I definitely think
intention to like explain this, so I was kind of doing it off the cuff, but
no, I definitely agree that like for me, when Nicholas talks about production being like the invisible kind of like rope that ties everyone together, I really feel that for me, I see that rope very clearly in my work because I work very well with constraints and I have to know that the rope exists. Because if I don't, I will be that designer that suddenly makes a feature that's going to create a ton of downstream work just because I'm like really passionate about it or I'm really excited, right? And if anything, something that came up a couple weeks ago was someone like seeing something I'd done and going, "Oh man, that's like really cool. We need to do less of it." Because
we're never going to ship. Yeah.
yeah, we're never going to ship. That's not going to happen. But I mean, it's funny because it's not just about it's not just about what the work that a designer does. Like they talk about how a design's job is to make work for everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think
you want designers to do less.
Yeah, you want generally. The producer's like, no, designers stop doing the work.
For all our Babby developers out there who are first getting into the games industry, what we really want to impress upon you is that you should be doing less. Stop working. Just stop. Just
stop crunching.
Don't stop crunching. Just don't work. Go watch a movie.
Only designers though. Like everybody else needs to work more. Like
everyone else.
Programmers need to work more. Artists need to work more. Animators need to work more. But like designers work less, please. Like.
And you heard it here, folks, from Masao Kobayashi, the production head of that designers, you can take a day off. Everyone else, get your act together. No, that's hilarious.
I mean, it's kind of a joke because there is and the funny thing is not that everything a designer does produces more work. A lot of times, there is actually quite a bit of work that designers need to do. And it's part of the work that they generally don't like to do.
Yeah, I hope so, but also yeah, we hate that.
So this is basically kind of the feature list and the kind of the dropping everything into some kind of a variable, because video games are software. So the only thing you can really do in video games is or in software is that you can just have variables. Everything ultimately needs to be either on or off, or 1 to 10. Those are the only two things that you can really have.
Yeah.
As a tool.
No, it's all about it's all those knobs to turn, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about the things that require look, I need it. You can even go negative in some cases, right?
Yeah.
If you need a negative to a positive, right, number, or you need a percentage, you need a weight here, you need this other knob here. How many numbers are you going to turn? And in some cases, though, it's possible to have too many variables, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because then you're just, turning the nuclear power plant, as Homer Simpson, and you're eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Which one of these is going to make the game feel great?
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's just...
And everything needs to be it's kind of you're at a soundboard.
Yeah.
And everything needs to be at the right level, because and then you move one thing and it's everything sounds awful.
Can you imagine a soundboard, but Stream Deck, but for game design? It's this is flight, this is jump height, this is the axis, this is fall off distance.
But that's part of the problem.
It does happen. You do get a debug menu where it's you have a bunch of sliders and pull down menus.
But then also from the human perspective, I mean, if we're going to use the soundboard analogy, then if you're EQing something, then every frequency though is an individual person, and you have to get that person to turn their knob.
Okay, so
okay, then explain the metaphor.
I'm going to explain the metaphor a little bit more.
Okay,
so what I was referring to is more kind of going from design to feature.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
So for example, going back to the monkey fighting game,
I really like this monkey fighting game, by the
Yeah.
way. I'm very excited for like Banana Whiplash.
We're
That's its
definitely Banana Whiplash, great.
Banana
Yeah.
Whiplash.
Primate instincts.
So like
That's
one
the DLC.
one lever could be like the size of the monkey. So you
Yeah,
can
okay,
have like big monkey and small monkey, and maybe
Okay.
that's a scale of 10.
Yeah.
And 10 is the biggest monkey and 1 is the smallest monkey. And
Okay.
then the programmer says like, okay, well, this is the smallest viable monkey that we can have that without breaking the game, and 10 would be the biggest monkey
Okay,
that you
yeah.
can have without breaking the game.
Yeah.
So that would be like one lever. Another lever would be like the speed of the monkey, right? So the like fast would be a very fast monkey. Like 10 would be the fast monkey and 1 would be the slow monkey. So
Okay.
those two levers would be like, okay, well, I want to have a really big monkey that's really slow. So then you have like 2 levers. And basically those levers are essentially like the variables. And
Okay.
and this is what I was talking about. So the programmer, I mean, and this is all complete bullshit, because this is not these aren't real variables that you could actually work with. But basically getting the idea of like, okay, well, we want to have a monkey fighting game, and these are the kind of characters I want to have, and translating that into individual like features, that because the programmer needs to program like these levers, because that's the only thing they can really do. Like, like computers aren't going to take like a abstract idea of like and give you a return. So like you need to feed it like, okay, like this is the variable that I want.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of what I'm saying, like the transition between like,
yeah, it's the transition between that like high level spec, right? Like we're gonna have, Banana Whiplash, right? Combines big strong monkey and his local co-op game, right? Small fast monkey, to throw bananas out like pistols, and then you can boomerang bananas, right? Like that's like this high level weird co-op platformer game, right? But then like the second level of that is going to be more of like the feature spec, and the third level is that technical spec, right? It's like, okay, these are the variables that are going to define it. Are we going to have players like customize their own monkey? So like big and strong monkey could actually be between like 6 and 10, right? And the player actually determines like which height. And I think it's really interesting to go into that process, because I do think that that type of level of like documentation and design, I say design, but I do mean like feature creation, right? It's not just a designer that would be writing it. An animator could be writing it as well, right? Or an engineer, like you'd said. Because I think it's the same between indie and AAA. Like all kind of like ideas, right, start out like that. But I think what's really hard for people to understand, or at least it was for me getting into the industry, especially when you get to that economy of scale, was how do you pitch those, when you pitch those ideas to like your friends, right? Like Banana Whiplash is going to be, this top local co-op amazing game of the year, right? 2022, it's going to be great, right? Like that's your friends. You're like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. But then when you try to pitch it to like, top dog, like Ubisoft officials, right? Like Banana Whiplash has a very different presentation structure. And I feel that a lot of people that are in charge of those are producers. So could you talk a little bit about how not only is it right going down from production step to that technical level, could you also kind of talk about how is it once you've gotten those variables, right? How do you communicate that back up?
Okay, so that's kind of more on the like in the indie that's called business development, and and in AAA they don't really call it anything, and they just call it pitching, I guess.
Yeah, in AAA it's just like, this is a thing that sometimes you do. Have fun. Good luck. Have you done it before?
And basically
no? Fine.
And the producer, or like the management of the team, has to basically put together a PowerPoint presentation saying like, okay, well, we want to do this game, and all of that generally tends to be more kind of market-based things. So basically you say things like, okay, well, this is the setting of the game. This is what the game is going to look like. These are the either what they call unique selling points or differentiators, depending on who you ask. So basically saying like, okay, these are the points that make this game different than other games on the market that are similar to it. And then you say like, okay, well, other games that are similar to this game also sell, X million units. And the demographic looks like this, or player profiles look like this. These are people who like chaotic co-op games that are kind of fun and kooky and fast paced.
Right.
So then I guess the question I have is then when you're pitching, or when you sort of, as Lauren said, like speaking up, like how much of that sort of like granular detail about sort of like features and sort of like, as you said, individual variables gets communicated, or does that stuff tend to get sort of shunted to one side?
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
They see that as a you problem. Basically, they say like how many. So that gets translated into like how much money do you need and how much time do you need. And internally, usually it's more like, because AAA development generally doesn't talk in dollars. They talk in staff hours or staff years, staff months. So basically say that you need a team of 500 people 2 years to make this game. Whereas in indie, it's like, I need, $1.5 million or $10 million to do this. And my $10 million looks like, 10 people for 2 years or whatever. Like,
yeah, no, I definitely can see that with like, when I look at a couple of the new studios that have been opening up, a couple of my friends have joined, just because in California, investments are here, right? And game devs are here. And kind of in the great resignation of people leaving their old jobs and going into these new jobs, they are getting like funding in the terms of 1 million, 10 million, right? For staffing up very large teams. And I am curious, what is your opinion on, do you have a smaller team that makes more and you have more of that money because you've been seeded from that investment, like that AAA team? And I hate saying it like that, right? But
well, AAA is super gross. Like, I was talking to somebody about this. Like, the fact that we've, as an industry, have adopted AAA. Like, AAA is a bond term. Like, the reason, people say the word AAA is because, there's different kinds of debt that you can get in the world outside of video games. So, and depending on how, how likely that you will pay back that debt, you have different debt rating. AAA is the best kind of debt rating you can have. By the way, the US is pretty bad. I think they're at double B now.
Yes.
double B studio.
We also have the world reserve currency, so screw you guys.
Anyway, AAA means that it's a secure, and that's where the whole AAA video games came from. Like, we're going to spend a lot of money, but this is a secure investment. It's most likely going to make money.
Yeah, so that's exactly kind of what I'm trying to touch on here, is that if you are an independent developer, but people are giving you that AAA money because they feel like you're a secure investment, how can you put the bond rating to an actual individual?
You can't. It's extremely speculative. It's VCs are. So the idea of venture capitalists basically will fund 20 games and hopefully one of them makes enough money.
And I guess I do have to
apologize.
I know you're in product management and not necessarily business development.
I do business development.
Okay, I feel like there's I always feel like there's that overlap sometimes when you're on a smaller team, that when you're in production, you're also in biz dev.
Yeah, and I'm generally more interested in economics and business in general in life. So this is not.
How many grapes are in your 2-pound grape bag? Sorry, that was. That's awesome.
So what's happening now? Basically, there's a flood of money going into video games. So macroeconomically, there's too much money right now. Investors have too much money; they don't know what to do with it because the pandemic kind of resulted in everybody thought everybody's going to lose all this money because of the pandemic, but in reality, stock prices shot up. So now people have all this money to do something with, but because stocks have become very expensive, they're less good as an investment. So everybody has all this cash that they want to do something with, but they don't want to put it in existing stock because it's too expensive. So there's ton of money that's going into speculation everywhere. One of the things that's happening is also in video games. Video games continue to make a lot of money over the pandemic. So everyone's very excited to put more money into it. And so what's happened is that all these venture capital and existing studios Tencent or the Embracer Group is basically funding smaller studios to kind of pop up. And what's happening is so in that kind of investment, like the investment is not based on project, it's based on people. So they say like, okay, you are a creative director of, you know, whatever, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, or whatever, and you have a team of 10 people that you can bring from your, you know, your years of experience, that everybody has like 10 years more experience, and then now we're going to give you, you know, let's say $1.2 million plus per person, because like that's how we evaluate how much like your studio is worth, and in exchange for, you know, whatever 30% of the equity in your new studio.
Oh, that's so they actually are kind of valuing it by, and like, I don't want to be like individual contribution, but like in an individual level.
Yeah, it's like head count. They don't even care who it is.
Jesus.
Because the thing is like, well, it's impossible to evaluate anyway. That's the thing. Like how much a single game developer is worth is arbitrary, because the thing is like you.
Yeah, but for Hideo Kojima, like, is he?
He's different. Like that's
there
a
we
different
go,
case.
right?
Yeah. Like, and that's why a lot of times these like new indie studios have like a figurehead that's clearly more famous than everybody else, because the investment is centered around that person. So that person is basically like the linchpin of this investment. Anybody even getting this investment, but to determine how much money like they get as a whole is based on like, okay, well, how many people can you recruit? How many people can you bring? You know, that's not like students.
Well, and there is value to a name beyond just like, you know, celebrity, which is that like, you know, working for someone who has established status within the industry is also then valuable for those individuals, and so there will be a certain like degree of like competitiveness amongst them, and so you can recruit based solely on that. I mean, and it also
most of the time I've seen is like basically they there are people who worked with them that want to work with them more.
Okay. That
seems to be more of the factor. They believe that like this is a leader that I can follow, because that's kind of one of the biggest problems in AAA. Like when you're trying to look for a job, like you're generally not necessarily looking for projects. You're looking for people you want to follow. Like that's generally the case. So
I would say that's generally the case, maybe more now or more recently, or for people that have been in the industry for a while.
Yeah.
Because this is actually touching on a topic that I think would be really great to wrap this up, because we're talking on something that's very human, and that's trust.
For sure.
That's a leader I want to follow, right? For me, I had no idea who my studio head was when I was approached by them, and I did not realize that they were famous, at least in the world that they came from, which was Call of Duty. Like, I did not know who they were. I quite literally was like, okay, you're a Bay Area startup, man, sure. And then after I looked them up, I was like, wow, you've given like real interviews and you've have like memes after you. Okay, you're like you're a real human, but like you're actually quite a trustworthy individual, right? Like they built that trust even with like with their reputation, right? Like it preceded them. Well, did not precede them. It followed them, but whatever. And then the bad word choice. But you kind of see my point, right? Is that now I am working for someone who other people were like, oh, I've worked with them and I want to work with them. But the internet and the recommendations of people that had worked with this individual established that trust. So I started so that I joined this new studio, right? And even though it's actually been relatively like strong hiring during COVID, like I think 60% of our people at our company have been hired during COVID in a completely remote way, which is just crazy because they started as all inside a studio. They used to be like in these law offices that they like had to rent for like the first 6 months or 9 months or something, and then moved out to a big building, and then COVID hit, right? So like the office is basically blank. And so I'm really curious, like when you have someone who's coming from AAA, starting a new venture, getting that funding, that's one way of like kind of they already have established trust. But what can we do, or what have you seen when you don't have that established trust? Maybe you're just starting out, or your career, you're just starting out, so you have no career experience. Or you could say you have 5 years of career experience, right? And now you're joining a smaller team, or you're trying to start your other thing. Like how have you seen people build that trust?
Well, what happened? So there's two kinds of indie studios. Like indie studios that like we're talking about like right now with like cash injections, and basically they're not traditional indie studios per se. Like we're talking about basically they're just
Yeah.
smaller.
AAA
I mean,
studios.
corporate studios, if you
yeah.
want to call it like that. But like,
Corporate is a good word.
mainstream studios. I mean, because
Corporate-
I
don't know. Mainstream is
I want to
weird.
use the word mainstream precisely because like you are so like the market that say like a Hades is going for is the same market, like they're working within the same marketplace. So like the reason why I use that is
yeah,
because
but we're working on the same marketplace. Like if you look at a breakthrough hit in an indie context, if you look at Among Us, or if you look at
Yeah.
like Hollow Knight, like these are very indie teams. Like
Yeah.
But in the end, it becomes like a mass market product because it's successful. I think in my indie generally is an aesthetic more than anything, because
Okay.
like you get like for example, Ori and the Ori game series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ori and the
That
Black
is
Forest.
that studio is quote unquote indie. They have like 100 people that work for that studio,
Yeah.
and all of the money came from established investment. So like not in a genuine sense, like it's not a real independent bootstrap studio.
Right.
Same with like shoot, what was the name of the company that did Fall Guys? People talked about Fall Guys being like an indie game. It's like, no, like this is a giant studio with like tons of people working on this studio. Like it's just that it's not Call of Duty. Essentially anything that isn't like like Activision, Ubisoft, or EA is considered indie. And it, I mean, from a financial standpoint, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But I'm getting sidetracked. So
No, I actually really liked all of that. So that was right on track. Moving back on track.
Going back to like quote unquote indie studios. So you have studios that basically get like giant investment from established video game investors, either VC or publishers that are interested in popping up new studios, etc. And they invest in people who have a lot of experience in video games, and they basically can recruit a bunch of people who all get salaries from day one. So that's one kind of indie studio. Another kind of indie studio is basically like 5 friends decide that they want to make a video game together, and they have no money, and they kind of just like figure it out. They either have day jobs, or they like they saved up some money to make a prototype that they're going to then pitch to a publisher. Or maybe they just like go and just self-publish, and they just kind of figure it out and they get the game out. So that's the other type. Basically, unless you're famous and you have a bunch of people working that want to work with you, like option A is not available to you. Like unless you're like even if you have a lot of experience, like I've worked in the industry for 15 years, nobody would invest in me. Like if like Cut to Bits was not a thing, and I'm like, okay, I get 5 of my friends who all worked in video games for 15 years plus, and we go to investors and be like, yeah, we want to get some money. They would be like, who are you guys again? Like they won't care. Like we're not famous, and we're not directors. So basically what you need is someone who is a high level programmer, high level designer, high level artist that has some level of recognition within the industry. So, maybe you're a game director on whatever IDOS game that came out last year, or you are
I like how it was a struggle to be like that IDOS game that came out last year. I don't know if there was an IDOS game.
I'm trying not to name people I actually know.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm like, my direct impulse is like, yes, I know this person that's trying to like start a studio. I don't want to mention it, but or like you're a lead programmer on a large AAA project, and you have a team of people that are interested in making your game. So if you're one of these people, then VCs and like publishers will be coming to you and saying like, we would like to offer you some money because we think that your investment is interesting. Pretty much anybody else in the world doesn't have that equivalent. So at that point, they either get investment because like maybe your family's rich, or
I really like maybe your family's rich. Man, I'll take that.
So,
or you met like an industrialist at a bar and it's like, yeah, I'll give you $1.2 million, whatever. It's not a big deal.
Look at all my architecture and retail advancements.
So like basically those are the kind of people that get investment. Everybody else basically needs to have something they're selling. And generally what they're selling is a demo. So they kind of have to like bootstrap at least the demo. So like they kind of have to do like 6 months of work with that's not getting paid by anybody external. So either, savings or whatever, like you're paying for it by working some other job. And hopefully you sell that idea to a publisher and then they'll give you the rest of the money to make the game. Like that's how you have to do it. And if you're a student, then yeah, that's the only thing that's available to you. If you're a dev that has 5 years of experience and doesn't have any like kind of visibility, then again, that's what you have to do.
So with that, that's actually a really great place to wrap up. I want to thank Masao for coming on and definitely schooling me, probably not schooling Lauryn. This is so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
Schooling.
We didn't get to talk about what I wanted to talk about.
Well, if you want to stick around, and
okay. Well, actually, I can stick around for a little bit longer, I think.
Well, because
I don't hear anybody upstairs, so I don't think anybody's come home.
Because we're about to record a Patreon episode, so if you want to stick around and just at the top, you'd be like, "Okay, bitches, I want to finally get this out."
I do want to talk about intentionality and process, intentionality versus process, and how everybody seems to think that game developers have an idea for a video game and they make that game, and it's not. It doesn't the world does not work like that.
Yeah, well, we can definitely record a second one. So, Nicholas, go ahead and you can stop this recording.
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to let it trail. I'm just going to stop it. Well, actually, no, you should put in a bit where you promo whatever you want to promo. So, go ahead, promo stuff.
Me?
Yes, you.
Oh, okay. So follow me on Twitter. I am Mega Masao, MEGA and I also have a podcast called What Else Do You Do, where I interview game devs about what they do when they're not making video games. Lauryn is supposed to be on there at some point.
I will be on there at some point.
And our studio is cut to bits, and eventually we're gonna announce and our game's super awesome. So please keep your eye out for that.